in Los Angeles. And one of my first cases that I handled, I was contacted by some of Dr. Jeffrey R. McDonald's doctor friends. I don't know if you remember the movie Fatal Vision, the book Fatal Vision. This was the former Green Beret doctor, and he was a doctor at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. On February the 17th, 1970, he was asleep in his living room. It was a house on Castle Drive on the base. It was an open base, however. And he was awakened by two white males, a black male in E6 sergeant stripes with camouflage jacket, and also by a white female with a floppy white hat and a long blonde wig. The white female had lights flickering across her face. She was chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs, acid is groovy, kill the pigs." The two white males, one had a knife, one had an ice pick. The black male with the E6 sergeant stripe camouflage jacket on had a 32-inch bed slat. We found out later it was actually a bed slat, but to McDonald at that time it was just a post of some, or a pole of some sort. And Dr. McDonald wrapped, according to him, wrapped his hands and his wrists with his pajama tops and was fainting off the blow. While he was fighting with them, he heard his daughter say, "Jeff, Jeff, help me, help me." And he heard his daughter, yeah, it's a 5.5-year-old daughter say that, and his wife yelling, "Jeff, Jeff, why are they doing this to me? Why are they doing this to me?" He felt a sharp pain to his right side. He awoke probably an hour and 15 minutes later, maybe hour and a half. He was half in the living room, half in the hallway. Total silence in the house. He went back. Here was his wife with 26 stab wounds in her chest. The children had numerous stab wounds in their bodies. Well, all three of them were killed. The government, it was on a government reservation, the government claimed that Dr. McDonald went to bed and he noticed that the 5.5-year-old child who was sleeping with the mother had wet the bed, and that he had a big argument with his wife, and because of this argument over the child wetting the bed, he wiped out the whole family. It's absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, so I was asked by some of Dr. McDonald's friends to investigate the case. And I told Dr. McDonald, I said, if you're guilty, as soon as I find out you're guilty, I'm not going to investigate any further. If you're innocent, I'll go right to the mat with you. Now, the gentleman had just been convicted in August 1979 of these 3 murders. Even though the murders had been committed some 9 years prior to this, there were a number of appeals. And he was not indicted by the grand jury until 1974. So that was the reason for the delay. So I entered the case, and I noticed in reviewing the case, going through records, and I spent hours reading all kinds of material, the court dockets and testimony, etc. I noticed that skin that was in Colette's fingernails was turned over to William F. Ivory, who was the chief investigator for the Army, and it disappeared. Dr. McDonald did not have a scratch mark on him. The skin obviously was from one of the assailants, Colette being the wife. From skin, you can tell what type of blood the person is who was scratched, right? That just plain disappeared off the earth. Also, in reviewing the records, I noted that there were 14 candle wax drippings in the house. And remember now, Colette had light flickering across her face. And these candle wax drippings, including one that was in the child's bed sheet, were foreign to any other candles and candle wax found in the house. I also noted that an FBI agent, hairs and fibers expert named Paul Stombaugh, lied to the grand jury, and if you want documentation on that, you can read the book Fatal Vision by McGinnis. And in there, it states that he testified before the grand jury and said that the hair in Colette's right hand was Colette's hair. Well, what happened was they found that Colette had hair in her hand. They tested it against Dr. McDonald's. It did not match, so it had to come from someplace, so they said it was Colette's. You cannot say that hair is identical. You can say it's similar. You can say it's cut, pulled, peroxide, what part of the body it came from, and it's similar. I noticed also that according to Helena Stokely, I obtained a confession from her on October 25, 1980. I brought her back to LA. That's a story by and of itself. And Helena Stokely told me that it was her Satanic cult group that went into the house that night. and it was her initiation into the group. And I said, what is this all about? And that was really the first I learned about Satanism. But Alina told me that to prove that she was in the house, that she had attempted to ride the rocking horse in the child's bedroom. The spring was broken. She wouldn't have known about that otherwise. She told me that, that there was a jewelry box. I asked her specifically, was there anything, arrangement of the furniture, draw the diagrams of the house and so forth? She did that. I asked her about a jewelry box on the master bedroom dresser. She said there was a jewelry box there. I had her describe it, and she described it. I went down, got a Sears and Roebuck catalog. I showed her the catalog. She picked out the box. It was identical with it. She talked about also that there was something unusual happened that night. She said that right in the middle of all this commotion and this fighting, that the phone rang. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, I answered the phone, and there was a man asked for Dr. McDonald. And I said, well, then what happened after that? And she said, well, Dwight Smith, who was the person she identified as also being there were some 7 individuals involved in the crime, said, hang up the GD phone. And so she hung up the phone. Well, later on, I found out through my investigative effort that the person who made that call was a fellow named James Fryer, and he was in the penitentiary in western North Carolina, out of Asheville, North Carolina. And I called the warden. I made arrangements to go out and interview him on a Saturday morning. Well, when I arrived out there that morning, can you guess what happened? He had escaped the night before. And in developing additional information on the case, I learned that one of the early prosecutors, Jim Proctor, was the judge's ex-son-in-law. He was divorced from his wife, but still the judge was a grandfather to the children. And I learned that the police intelligence files on this group of Satanists that Alina described by name gave me descriptions of exactly where each one of them went in the house, what happened, step by step. Intelligence files disappeared out of the Fayetteville Police Department files, and also out of Waycross, Georgia, because one of them had been arrested down there. I learned subsequently that there were 2 black fibers on Colette's tongue in her mouth. There was a black fiber on the 32-inch bed slat, and there was a black fiber wool on her chest, black wool, okay? Determined it was black wool. The FBI had in their notes, their handwritten notes, that it was black wool, and a question mark as to where it came from. When the report was filed, typed up, the formal report was typed up and filed and furnished to the defense, that information was left out. Now, in conducting my investigation, I learned that the only black wool in the house that night was Alina Stokely's skirt. She had on a black wool skirt. I also learned that as a result of my confession, and later on there were some other confessions, a girl named Kathy Perry confessed to the FBI, but she said that she was high on drugs, and there were two children, they were boys that were killed that night, so the FBI discounted it. There's another individual, Greg Mitchell, who was one of the assailants named by Alina Stokely, who confessed to the neighbors that he was involved in the murders. But to this day, to this very day, that man is still in jail, in spite of this overwhelming evidence that he's innocent. Now, to confirm and document that it was a satanic cult murder, there were several signs that were left behind. This is always usually the case. They always leave signs behind. There were unexplained bird feathers in the house. There was a headless doll, and the 2.5-year-old child had 10 shallow ice pick wounds in her chest in the form of an S. I asked Helena, I said, Helena, what did that S stand for? And she said, Satanism. So this was a shock to me. The McDonald case, this man's in jail. I couldn't understand it. I went on national television, a number of national TV shows. I debated Freddie Kassab, the father-in-law, on CNN. And also a psychiatrist was there. And I talked about this satanic aspect. And I had people calling me from all over the country, telling me the same basic story, from the East Coast, the West Coast, North and South. And I had people that, what you'd call them multi-generation Satanists. That's somebody who was born into it, mother, father, grandfather, grandmother are involved in Satanism. And adult survivors, that's somebody that gets out, usually has to go into hiding to survive. I had these people call me from all over the country telling me about the ceremonies and about the extent of the satanic movement in this country today. So I started investigating it myself. I gave a number of lectures on it. I had some national exposure, of course. And the bottom line is it's very easily explained, and it fits into a pattern. And this goes back some 200 years. Helena Stokely told me that the reason for the cover-up was because her satanic cult drug group were bringing drugs in from the base that had been flown in plastic bags in the body cavities of the dead GIs from Vietnam in Air Force planes, CIA planes. They were bringing the drugs off the base and distributing them up and down the East Coast. And they went in on their own, wiped out the McDonald family, without the knowledge of the higher-ups in the drug operation, which included some top Army personnel, some police officers, 2 attorneys in Fayetteville. And the higher-ups were afraid that if there was an investigation of Helena Stokely's satanic cult group, it could expose the whole operation. You want documentation on drugs being flown in plastic bags in the body cavities of the dead GIs? Look at Time magazine, January 1, 1973. I mentioned Mena, Arkansas, drugs. By the way, there's been so much heat placed on Mena, Arkansas, that they shifted their operation for this drug activity to Biloxi, Mississippi. I mentioned the laundering of money on the Mena, Arkansas case. They were laundering their money through the Arkansas Development Finance Authority into a BCCI bank in Atlanta, Georgia, and one in Florida. And they also laundered their money in Ross Stankowski's bank in Chicago.